investigatory work related to accounting. Then the team on this side of the table is from Covington and Burling, which is one of the most respected law firms in the United States, a large international firm based here. It's a partner, Bruce Baird, Peter Truboff, senior counsel, and his name tag is on the way, so you'll see the spelling on that, and Anna Hawk, an associate at the firm. So with that, I'll turn it over to them. The format today is they'll present their interim findings, then they'll take some questions, and then at the end of the event, I have some contacts for follow-up if you have any other questions you'd like to pursue after this event here today. So I'll turn it over now to Bruce Baird.
Great, thanks. Former Prime Minister Yuliya Tymoshenko has been charged in the Ukraine with abuse of power and improper use of budgetary funds related to the handling of revenues received in 2009 from the exchange of carbon emission credits under the Kyoto Protocol. I'm going to refer to these charges, we all will, as the Kyoto charges. She's also been charged with abuse of power related to Ukraine's purchase of 1,000 Opel vehicles and other medical equipment under a contract with an Austrian company called Baumit. I'm going to refer to these charges as the Opel combo charges. Covington and Burling and BDO USA have been asked by Yuliya Tymoshenko and her party, the Batkovshchina party, to look at the facts set forth in the Kyoto and Opel combo charges, as well as an October 14, 2010 report by American law firms Trout Kacharis and Aiken Gump, paid for by the government of Ukraine, and on which these charges appear to be based. The government of Ukraine's American lawyers actually made a point in their report of saying that anyone could replicate the findings that they made by looking at all the documents that they looked at to test the validity of their conclusions. They said that in their report. We tried to do that. We asked them for the documents they used, and they declined to give us any documents. They gave us a link to a website that has some public documents, but that's it. After they refused, what they said to us was, go ask the Ukrainian government, so we did that too. We asked the Ukrainian government, several agencies of the Ukrainian government, and they have not responded to our requests. This lack of transparency does not allow us or anyone to reach the principal conclusions set forth in the government of Ukraine, by the government of Ukraine and its American lawyers with respect to the Kyoto and Opel sections of their October 14, 2010 report and the corresponding charges that we are looking at. The documents publicly available do not allow us or anyone to gain a full understanding of the investigation by the government of Ukraine and its American lawyers. They do not allow anyone to understand the facts involved or to test the validity of their conclusions, professional opinions, or investigation as a whole. Unless this supporting evidence is provided, to start with, the Kyoto and Opel sections of that October 14, 2010 report are really not worth the paper they're printed on. So we looked at the facts and documents that we could get hold of ourselves. That's a combination of things our client was able to get in Ukraine, things we were able to discover through our own investigation. And what we found, we thought was striking enough to justify this interim report and to justify asking that the government of Ukraine make available the facts on which it is basing the prosecution. It looks like it is not based on facts. With respect to the Kyoto charges, we'll be talking more detail about the Kyoto charges. We're able to say as follows. First, in 2009, the National Environmental Investment Agency, the NEIA of Ukraine, entered into 4 agreements with various Japanese companies and 1 agreement with Spain's Ministry of Environment for the exchange of carbon emission credits under Article 17 of the Kyoto Protocol. Under the agreement, Ukraine received approximately €320 million in 2009 and €150 million in 2010 for a total of $470 million in exchange for 47 million carbon emission credits. going to refer to the proceeds that Ukraine received under these agreements as Kyoto revenues. The Kyoto agreements required Ukraine to use the Kyoto revenues received by 2013 to fund environmental projects to be selected jointly. So they got the money in 2009, 2010. They're supposed to use it by 2013. The money was to be managed in accordance with Ukraine's usual budgetary and fiscal policies, taking into account the restricted environmental purposes for which they were intended. And now I'm going to ask Lee Dewey of the BDO to talk a little further about the accounting aspects of this transaction.
Thank you, Bruce. The 320 million euro of Kyoto revenues that was received in 2009 was the equivalent of approximately 3.3 billion hryvnias. The amount recorded as the 2009 balance of the Ukraine's special fund account that was designated for use by the NEIA under the Ministry of Environmental Protection for implementing the environmental projects required by the Kyoto agreements. I'm going to refer to this special fund account as the Kyoto Special Purpose Account. The documentation that we've been able to review makes it clear that the Kyoto Special Purpose Account balance of approximately 3.3 billion hryvnias as of the date of receipt remained constant throughout the period at issue here. None of the Kyoto revenues were expended in 2009. And because this balance remained the same as on the date of receipt, any allegation that Prime Minister Tymoshenko used these funds contrary to their target purpose is untrue. Of course, like cash, the Ukraine receives from any revenue source, whether it's taxes or levies. The state treasury manages the cash received of the Kyoto revenues within its vested powers as the treasury and according to the needs of the moment. Just as it would be some of the money that was first converted into Ukrainian's local currency. Although this resulted in a small commission fee, Ukraine did not suffer any state loss as a result of that commission fee, since it was paid to the National Bank of Ukraine, another state agency, and the National Bank of Ukraine actually returned more to the state treasury's budget in 2009 than that amount of that commission, so there was no loss effectively. Ukraine's state treasury operates in a manner similar to a bank. As depositors make deposits to their checking and savings account, the bank would record an obligation to each depositor, like the Kyoto Special Purpose Account. The cash itself that the bank may be holding could be commingled and used for various purposes, but the obligation to the depositor remains the same until the depositor decides it wants to use the funds for the purpose for which it is intended. The bank, as I said, takes the cash and may use it for loans or investments, understanding all the time that the depositor could require the use of the funds that they've deposited at any particular time. Banks, like state treasuries, use asset and liability management techniques to retain sufficient cash on hand to meet the obligations that cash on hand or borrowing facilities in order to meet the obligations of the special purpose funds or the needs of the depositors in the case of a bank. This, as I've said, is not only the way banks operate, but it's also the way Treasury manage their finances. In this context, cash is fungible. It's controlled by the Treasury. Thus, the movement of cash is not particularly informative. Rather, what is significant are the books and records of the Treasury, which establish from the date of receipt the Kyoto revenues were required to be used to fund greening measures. And because this restricted use was properly accounted for, the movement of cash by the Treasury did not affect the balance in the Kyoto Special Funds account, Special Purpose Account. It remained the same throughout this period. The first expenditure of Kyoto revenues did not occur until December of 2010. which was after Prime Minister Tymoshenko had left office. And the amount of that first expenditure was approximately 117 million hryvnias. According to government documentation, it's clear that this amount was spent and that no other prior withdrawals to pay any state expenses were made. Thus, as of December 29, 2010, the balance of the Kyoto Special Purpose account essentially consisted of the original amount that was deposited from the Kyoto revenues, less this expenditure in December of 2010.
And consistent with these findings that Lee has described, the government of Ukraine has actually been reassuring Japan since May of 2010 that all the Kyoto revenues were actually fully accounted for. When these allegations first came up, Japan went to the government of Ukraine and said, what are these? You're making allegations that Prime Minister Tymoshenko misused this money. Then tell us what's up with this. And the government of Japan was told that no, actually all the money's properly accounted for. Also, a June 2010 government commissioned report by a large Ukrainian accounting firm didn't find any concerns with how the Kyoto revenues had been handled. Japanese officials were content with how the Kyoto revenues were used and transferred, and have confirmed that the country has no objection to purchasing carbon emission credits from Ukraine in the future as a result of the handling of these revenues under the Tymoshenko government. In fact, after the Tymoshenko government had left, they proved that by transferring another 150 million euro in carbon emission credits, the remainder of the first transaction, to the Ukraine. Had any of the Japanese companies or Spain's Minister of Environment considered Ukraine in breach of any obligation under the Kyoto agreements, the parties could have sent a notice of default to the Ukraine and terminated the agreement under its enforcement provisions. Instead, as I've said, the new Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization of Japan paid more money in 2010, and Spain's Ministry of Environment did too. These amounts were transferred to the Ukraine following an investigation by the Japanese into allegations of misuse of the Yanukovych government. And to us, that's strong evidence that the Kyoto revenues were used in a manner consistent with the parties' understanding of the terms of the Kyoto agreements and the Kyoto Protocol itself. The charges of Ukraine's Prosecutor General and the claims made in the report by their American lawyers either ignore completely or do not adequately address these facts. They do not deal with these accounting records in Ukraine. They follow the cash, which is irrelevant, and they do not address the accounting records, which are the key, the heart of the matter. So they state conclusions that are not supported by facts. That's what we found so far on the Kyoto. Now let me turn to the Opel charges. The Opel Combo, as it's known. That's a model of Opel car. With respect to the Opel Combo charges, there's no dispute about a few things. There's no dispute that in early 2009, Ukraine's Ministry of Health determined that the country's regional health departments were in urgent need of specialized vehicles. The Ministry of Health found that the health of Ukraine's rural population was significantly worse than that of urban people, with rural healthcare service providers lacking what's required for performing the simplest diagnostic and treatment procedures, and also that they couldn't get around. They couldn't reach the villages they needed to reach. To address this urgent need, state-owned enterprise called Med Postash entered into an agreement with VAMED, an Austrian company, for the provision of medical equipment, including 1,000 Opel Combo vehicles. The hope was, to quote, was that fitting out primary medical and sanitary care institutions with modern medical equipment and means of transport would make it possible to render expert medical care and qualified emergency care to patients in hard-to-reach areas. The documents we've reviewed made clear that the VAMED contract was a direct commercial contract between VAMED and Postash, and in which no intermediaries were involved. And I'm going to turn to my colleague Peter Truboff to more particularly describe that transaction.
Again, working from the documents we have, the financing arrangements for the first phase of the Valmet contract, including its reliance on guarantees and servicing from Ukrainian and Austrian governmental entities, follow well-established international practice for supporting a major export transaction. To finance the bulk of the Valmet contract, an Austrian private bank, UniCredit Bank Austria AG, furnished an 85 million euro loan to the purchaser, a Ukraine governmental entity, Yuliya Tymoshenko, as Bruce has mentioned, at an annual interest rate of 5.5%. That loan was guaranteed by the Ukraine government, acting through its Cabinet of Ministers and Ministry of Finance. The guarantee is expressly referenced in the financing agreement with UniCredit. In addition, the Austrian government operates through its official export credit agency, OEKB, a program for financing Austrian value-added exports, such as Valmet's Opel Combo vehicles sold to UkrProdash. As mentioned in the financing agreement, OEKB furnished two types of financing coverage to UniCredit. Again, as is typical in emerging markets, the Ukrainian Export-Import Bank, Ukreximbank, provides banking, foreign exchange, and other services for the loan. Since Ukreximbank is a Ukrainian state entity, Ukraine is essentially paying itself the commission fees associated with the loan service by this entity.
And let me just say, I'll turn it over to Lee for the question of what were these vehicles worth, because the allegation, the heart of the allegation against Prime Minister Tymoshenko is that the Ukraine, under her leadership, spent too much for the cars. Lee?
Yes. Well, as noted in the government of Ukraine's American Lawyers report, Valmet initially offered to sell Opel combos at approximately 16,039 euros per vehicle. After further negotiation, Ukraine ultimately purchased a different model of Opel Combo vehicle at 12,500 euros per vehicle. And based on the government documentation that we've reviewed, the price paid for the Opel Combo vehicles was at or below market price, with the Ukrainian Ministry of Economics review specifically opining that the per vehicle manufacturer's price for the Opel Combo vehicles ranged between 16,000 euros and 18,000 euros. BDO USA's own research in this area confirms that the price paid by Ukraine for these Opel Combos appears to be either at or below market price.
And even the government of Ukraine's American lawyers did not find that the Valmet contract involved any quid pro quo or personal benefits to anyone, and in fact found that the price for the cars was probably market price, or better. On June 9th, 2011, the European Parliament expressed concern regarding the increase in selective prosecution of figures from the political opposition in Ukraine, particularly in the case of Ms. Tymoshenko, and stressed the importance of ensuring the utmost transparency in investigations, prosecutions, and trials, warning against any use of criminal law as a tool to achieve political ends. Our review of the facts thus far justifies the European Parliament's concerns. The facts we've found appear to be a complete defense to the charges, either in the Ukraine or another international forum if a fair trial can't be had in the Ukraine. Once our investigation is complete, it's not so far, we will try to find more. We understand our findings will be published on the website of Yuliya Tymoshenko and circulated by her or her party to governmental entities in the European Union and other countries and international organizations. That's our report. We have no questions.